Americans, my fellow Americans, just kidding, wrong job. As a society, Jewish Americans have become very practiced at telling a certain kind of Jewish story. And it is the story the world recognizes most easily. The story of vulnerability, of persecution, of what has been done to us. And it is a true story, and one that must be remembered and acknowledged. But it is not the entirety of who we are. And I'm beginning to wonder and start to really think about how we actually tell our story. This past week, I had the enormous privilege of being one of 150 rabbis across denominations who was invited to talk about the way we think and teach Zionism in our country. We had the even bigger privilege of hearing from Dr. Dara Horn, the acclaimed novelist and essayist known for her book, People Love Dead Jews, which, by the way, we are doing this for book club, I believe on April 11th. I hope you'll join us. She has served also, and perhaps most importantly, on many university advisory groups to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses. And there is so much that stayed with me from Dr. Horn's words. She described once being invited to speak about anti-Semitism and being advised quite seriously to avoid using the Z word, Zionism, because it might make people uncomfortable. Her response was immediate. If that word is off limits, she said, should I also avoid using the J word? Because of course I don't want to offend people who hate Jews. Without using the word Zionism, the story of the Jewish people cannot be told fully or honestly. Zionism is simply the Jewish people's self-determination to return as an indigenous people to their homeland. What was being asked of her, and often of many of us, is not sensitivity, but a quiet form of erasure, a request that we present ourselves in ways that is more acceptable to others, even if that means distorting who we are. And if we are honest, this is not new. For generations, we have shaped the way we present Jewish identity so that it could be more easily understood, more readily accepted by others, and less threatening within the broader culture around us. Rabbi Amitai Freiman, writing in the Jewish Journal, gives language to this instinct. He calls it the Schindler's List effect. The belief that if the world can be made to fully grasp our suffering, it will respond with care and protection. He describes in an implicit plea, watch us die and then love us. But he challenges this idea unambiguously, arguing that this framework no longer reflects who we are. Jewish life today is not defined solely by vulnerability. It includes agency, sovereignty, and the capacity to shape our own future. What is most striking in his argument is not simply the critique of how we are perceived, but the deeper, and I would argue more important claim about how we understand ourselves. And he writes, when we fund ads like the one recently aired during the Super Bowl, where a Jewish student needs the approval of another student to acknowledge his anti-Semitism he is experiencing, we are not only misreading the world, we are misreading ourselves. We are appealing to a moral paradigm that no longer applies to the world's perception of Jews and our power. We are speaking the language of vulnerability to an audience that already sees us as perfectly capable of defending ourselves and securing our own destiny. In doing so, we harm ourselves, reinforcing a self-image that is alien to the current reality. The problem is not that the world has failed to be moved by our assertions of victimhood. The problem is that we are still asking for the world's permission. That observation is difficult precisely because it turns the question inward. It asks not only how others see us, but how we have chosen to emphasize, to teach, and transmit our story. It is here that I want to turn to this week's Torah portion, Tzav, which offers a remarkably understated but very powerful vision of how Jewish identity is formed and sustained. Before any offering that is brought before God, before the rituals are enacted, there is a command. Ve'et kol ha'edah ha'kehel et ptach ohel moed. As we make this offering to God, gather the entire community at the entrance of the tent of meeting. What follows is not merely the inauguration of the priesthood, but the public transmission of a way of life. Moses brings Aaron forward, and Aaron stands with his sons before the people. The offerings that are made to God unfold in full view to the whole community, creating a chain of continuity that is both visible and embodied. What we are witnessing is not only ritual performance, but the earliest form of Jewish education, a model in which identity is taught communally, across generations, without delusion or apology. The knowledge is not outsourced, nor is it reshaped for the sake of external approval. It is presented as a living inheritance, one that demands both participation and responsibility. And at the center of this scene is another command, Esh tamid tukad al mizbeach lo techabe. A perpetual fire shall be kept burning. It must not go out. The fire is more than a physical reality. It represents the ongoing work of sustaining identity, of tending to something that endures only through deliberate care and transmission. Dr. Horn's arguments in many ways echoed this exact model. She suggests that over time we have reduced Judaism to something narrower than it is, often presenting it primarily as a religion, because that framing felt safer and more comfortable within the societies in which we used to live. Yet in doing so, we have stripped away essential dimensions of Jewish life: peoplehood, land, agency, leaving behind a version of identity that is easier to explain to others, but is far less complete. When those elements are removed, what remains can no longer fully answer the most basic question: who are we? And when our children ask that question, they encounter a vocabulary that is insufficient to hold the depth and the complexity of Jewish existence in today's fast-paced world where ideologies and knowledge are shaped by social media. If we only teach them what has been done to us, without also teaching what we have done, what we have built and chosen across generations, then what we pass forward is not a sustaining fire, but something far more fragile, leaving us as forever victims. Our story becomes shaped by how others control our destiny, and that is just not who we are. And the story we are commanded to tell is not limited to oppression. It is the story of becoming a people who acted, who chose, who stepped into uncertainty in order to claim freedom. It is a narrative that affirms not only what we endured, but how we responded and who we became as a result of that response. Yet many of us hesitate. We tell ourselves that we do not know enough, that we are not confident enough, that someone else is better equipped to explain these ideas. But that hesitation has consequences. When we refrain from telling our story, it does not remain untold. It is simply told by others, often in ways that do not reflect the truth. The question before us then is not whether the world understands us. It is whether we understand ourselves with enough clarity to teach our full story faithfully, without reducing it to what feels most accepted and least controversial. I've heard some of you say that the golden age of living in America is over for Jews. Gone are the days where we can live without anti-Semitism. I have news. It was all a delusion anyway. There's been a continuity of hiding our identity for a very long time. And as a matter of fact, there are sociological studies done of Americans who were not Jewish in the late 1940s and 50s that demonstrate that Americans did not feel bad about the Holocaust. None of them cared. In her talk, Dr. Horn describes that if anything, Americans thought that it had proved that the Jews were a problem and shouldn't be allowed to emigrate to the United States. It was courageous American Jewish activism that flipped the minds of Americans. This included policy activism from many large Jewish organizations that are still with us, thank God, today. There were lawsuits against discrimination like what we're seeing today. There was activism in culture and the arts and deliberate education for the American public about who the Jews actually are. And yes, American rabbis took the lead as well. Rabbis led the way by writing best-selling books, articles for popular magazines like Life magazine that introduced and explained Judaism to the broader American public. We, my friends, are all beneficiaries of that activism and leadership. It reshaped Jewish life in America and demonstrated just how powerful communal leadership can be. But that success came with a cost. In an effort to distance Jews from the Nazi racial definition, and in a moment when America itself was experiencing a religious revival while opposing the godless Soviet communism, Jewish leaders made a strategic choice to emphasize Judaism as a religion. It was a thoughtful decision for its time, but it came at the price of narrowing our self-understanding, because Judaism is not only a religion. And when we reduced it to just one, we set aside some of the most essential elements that have sustained Jewish life for millennia. Our sense of peoplehood, our shared history, and our enduring connection to the land of Israel. So if Judaism is not simply a race or religion, what is it? As Dara Horn teaches, Judaism resists all our modern categories. It is not only a religion, an ethnicity, a race, or a nationality, because it came before those concepts even existed. Judaism is older than the categories themselves that we try to explain our Judaism with. And when modern Hebrew linguists were reviving the Hebrew language, they had to comb through the Tanakh to find a word to mean religion, because Hebrew didn't have a word. So Jews, Dr. Horn explained, are a type of a social group that was very common in ancient Near East and very uncommon in the modern West. They are a joinable tribal group with a shared history, homeland, and culture. That was how we can be described in English, a whole sentence. A joinable tribal group with a shared history, homeland, and culture. In Hebrew, it's just one word that's 2 letters long. Am. Ein, mem. Am. We are Am Israel, the people of Israel. This is who we have always been for thousands of years. If people don't understand that basic category, Am Israel, she concludes, then they become vulnerable to every possible anti-Jewish lie. The lie that we all know and have become too accustomed. Dr. Horn has her next forthcoming book coming out this September, and the title is also perhaps more memorable than the first. It will be entitled, The Final Solution to the Jewish Question. Yeah. The premise of this book is that Jews are only acceptable to a non-Jewish society if Jews are powerless, politically impotent, or dead. And she adds that that is why the minute we say Israel, everyone loses their minds. Because Jews are not allowed to have power or agency, and certainly not sovereignty. And we, the American Jewish community, have often accepted that premise without even realizing we're doing it. She says we're like fish swimming in water asking, "What's water?" She drives this point further by speaking to something that honestly touched me so personally. She reminded all of us that we may think we haven't accepted this premise, but unconsciously we already have. So many of us are fine and totally comfortable with teaching our children and our neighbors about the Holocaust. We think it's something that should be mandatory and taught in American public schools, and that might be true. Yet we rarely insist that those same children learn about the nearly 1 million Jews driven out from the Islamic world, communities that survived in large part because Israel had the power to rescue them, like my family. That omission reveals something deeper. How easily we overlook the role of Jewish agency in our own story. And that is why we are totally comfortable with talking about the founding of the United States of America, which was a settler colonial state that committed both apartheid and genocide. But yet somehow we're not fine with talking about the founding of the State of Israel, which actually hasn't done any of those things. That is why we're fine with talking about how Jews stood up for Black Americans during civil rights, but we've completely buried the story of how openly this country discriminated against Jews until we stood up for ourselves. We have consciously accepted this anti-Semitic assumption that we need to be powerless. We have sometimes even deluded ourselves into thinking that it's a virtue. Our education for our children and communities has been almost entirely defensive. Instead of teaching our children and communities who we actually are and have always been, we train them for advocacy and being on the defense. Dr. Horn urges us to not give our children exclusively the list of talking points or 10 reasons why Israel isn't a genocidal colonial apartheid state, even though it is almost the only country within a 1,000-mile radius that isn't a genocidal colonial apartheid state. When we give people these talking points instead of telling them the true story of who we are and what we've always been, it means that without realizing it, we've accepted this anti-Semitic premise that we don't deserve power and agency, and that we have to prove that we're not evil. We are not only a people defined by what has been done to us. We are a people shaped by the choices we have made, choices that sustain our community to preserve memory and to continue building even in the face of extraordinary challenges. The fire described in this week's Torah portion continues to burn only if it is tended to. It requires intention, effort, and a willingness to claim ownership over what we pass forward. And we all must have buy-in, intentional buy-in. As we prepare to sit at our Seder tables in just a few days, we might ask ourselves a simple but profound question. When those around us ask who we are, will we offer a story that reflects only our vulnerability, or one that also reflects our strength, our agency, our creativity, our joy, and our enduring responsibility to carry this tradition forward? I invite you to tell the latter. Shabbat Shalom.